Alright, so as usual when we're painting, we want to start with a pre-sketch. This is important in the same way that making the shapes when we're doing how to draw to start off with is important. It helps us to block off sections the way that we want it, and it helps us to make sure that everything is even before we start putting down more permanent medium. So for starters for this one, we're going to put a horizon line in. Now, if you go about halfway between your paper and go a little bit lower down, if you look at the picture, the horizon line on this photo is a little less than halfway through. We're just going to do a relatively straight line. Alright, then breaking it into shapes, we've got essentially a triangle here, a triangle here, and then the mountains in the background, and they don't have to be exact. And one thing to remember is that in nature, there's very rarely ever going to be legitimately perfectly straight lines. So if you're drawing and your lines aren't perfect, don't worry about it. That's part of this. Alright, so now this side here has kind of a swoop down and then a bit of a ridge coming up like that. And this side is a little lumpy down at the bottom. Now, because of the water here, this is reflected, so we're going to do basically the same thing on the other side here. And it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but you want it to be as close as you can. Now, the reason it doesn't have to be exactly the same is because when the water ripples, it will distort the image anyway. So if you have this ever so slightly different, it's not going to be that big of a deal and it'll still read as a reflection. So don't stress yourself out any more than you have to here. Okay. Alright. Now you're going to take a brush. You can use a round brush if you want, or I like to use flatter ones like this. You're going to take a lot of water and you're going to get a blue color. Whatever blue you have will work. We can always alter it a little bit on the canvas if you want. I'm actually going to mix mine a little bit with some white because mine is pretty dark. Okay, now you're going to start at the top here, and you're not really going to end up adding any more color to your brush. You're going to start at the top and you're going to let your color run out as you go down, so it'll get lighter, just like that. And it's okay if you go over your lines. It's not going to be a dark enough color to make it so that you can't see your lines. Just keep bringing the color from the top down here. And you're going to do basically the exact same thing at the bottom here. Only you're going to start at the bottom and you're going to bring, oh, I didn't put an awful lot of color on there, but that's okay. You're going to bring your color up, just like that. Because it's watercolors, you can go right back over it and get it wet again and keep going if you got it a little bit too dry. And if you want it a little bit lighter, you can add some water and kind of push some of this color back up. Just like that. Alright, now we're going to take some black. Now there's an awful lot of dark all along here, all along this right here, on both sides. So we're going to add in some of that dark and then add lightness to bring it forward more. So let's start with, and we want to do, kind of tap it. You don't want it to be super smooth because the rocks and leaves and everything that are casting shadows on there aren't smooth. So, and on the spots that are really dark down here, you can put a lot of paint, but you want to start at the darkest spot in the corner here and then do just like what we did up here and kind of bring that color out. And a little bit of black will go a long way. So you probably won't need to put much more on your brush after you got some. And we're going to make sure that we have some black on our line here, but not all the way across, only under these, in between these two mountains here. And we can always make this darker later, but for right now we're just going to start with a dark undertone. So if it's more gray than black, that is fine. Okay, so now I'm going to grab some more black for up here. And we're not going to need nearly as much up here. It's mostly just along this line here. Like that. And then just kind of bring it out in little spikes like this. I'm going to add some extra shadows down here. Now we're going to do the same thing over on the other side. Now remember, the bottom has a lot more dark. You can see it in the picture. And always look at your reference photo. That's what you want to do. It might not always be a photo. Sometimes you'll be looking directly at a reference, like painting a portrait or painting scenery that you're actively looking at, but you always want to be looking at what you're trying to paint. When you try to make something look like what you think it's supposed to look like, a lot of the time it won't look as realistic. So the trick is just to keep looking at what you're painting. Now, it is definitely possible to get practiced enough at painting a specific thing that you can paint it without looking at it, but especially when you're first starting out, it is better to just keep using reference photos. Grab a little bit more water here so I can bring this across. Now it is the line is much lighter here and doesn't connect. See, there's these gaps right here in the reflection. They don't really connect. Okay, now there is kind of a divide between the mountains here. Alright, now I'm going to get kind of a light tannish brown color going here. And in order to do that, I am going to have to mix my brown with some white. Because this back mountain is kind of that tannish brown color. Now, from where you can still see your lines, you can go ahead and follow your lines. Otherwise, if you need to make it up a little bit, that's okay. Or look at your reference photo and see where you think it's supposed to be. I'm going to start at the top here, and it'll kind of fade out as you go down. Just like with the sky. Now you don't want to finish these mountains up front until you've done the mountains and back. Generally you want to start as far back as possible and work your way forward. Alright, now the center part of this mountain here is going to be kind of that same tan, but only a little bit in the center here. So I'm going to put kind of a layer of some of that on there. I'm going to put some of the darker tan, some of the lighter tan, and stretch it out. And this is basically just background color because all the foliage that's on that mountain is going to go over that. Then same thing here. If you don't have white, you can lighten your paint with water. I do find that it is a little easier to control it if you do it with white though. Alright, now I'm going to take a slightly darker brown and I'll put some highlights, technically low lights I suppose. on this back mountain. You don't need to do it super strong, just lightly brush it over it. You can kind of blend it together, do some kind of back and forth movement like this. Now this front mountain has more green than brown on it, but it's a very, very dull green. So I'm actually going to take my green and I'm going to mix it with some of my yellow and then a little bit of brown. Ooh, that was a lot of brown. There we go. That worked a little better. Alright, now we're going to do the same thing we did up here. We're going to kind of follow the top and do some back and forth brush movements like this. And grab some more water, grab that color and bring it down. You don't need gobs and gobs of paint. You just want to kind of spread the paint out. You can always add more, but it's a lot harder to take it off. Down at the bottom here, that green is much, much lighter, so I'm just grabbing it from the top and kind of pulling it down. Alright. And I actually do some kind of lines up and down like this along a section of my mountain, just dabbing out lines. And then I'm going to grab some water, but I'm going to wipe most of it off my brush, and then I'm going to go over those lines and just keep dabbing back and forth over those lines. Just like that. So then you get a totally different kind of texture, see? And this is the first one of the series. This is the first landscape painting we're going to do. So don't feel bad if it doesn't look quite the way you want. And feel free to play with the textures a little bit and see what you like for your brush strokes, what you don't. Every artist is a little bit different, and that is totally fine. I'll put a little bit of green on this back mountain too. Not a ton, because it's mostly, you can't really see the green on the back mountain as much, but alright. Now the mountains back here are going to be a little bit trickier because they are reflections, so they're a lot more distorted. The water is actually catching them. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the brown that we used over the top of this, and we're going to do kind of a back and forth like this on there. Just like that. We're only going to do kind of the peaks of that mountain. Like that. Then rinse off your brush. And go ahead and using it with water on it. You don't want it to be sopping wet, but you want it to be wet. Just go over that again. Now you want to make sure when you're doing water that you stay going back and forth following this horizontal line right here. Because then that way it'll look like the water is kind of catching the reflection and moving it. Now we're going to grab a darker green, and the reflection of this is actually darker than it is up on top, so I'm going to be pretty generous with that green here. And we're going to do that same thing with the other mountain. Alright, then we're going to use our wet brush with no paint on it and just go over that paint again. It's okay if it invades these side mountains and everything, because remember, it's not the actual mountains, it's the reflection. So the reflection is going to kind of seep into itself here. Alright, now because this is so much darker, I'm going to add some dark to it, but I'm actually not going to add black. I'm going to take some dark blue, and I'm going to do a little bit of that over some of these peaks as well. Just like this. Alright, we're gonna grab some of that dark green, and we're gonna kind of do some lines coming from the top going down, because it's catching these, basically what it is like foliage, trees, bushes and stuff that are coming down in streaks on that mountain. It's catching those in the reflection and making them look even bigger, so we want to make sure that we have that kind of captured as well. And then this part right here on the seam, I'm actually just taking my brush with just water on it. And I'm gonna go back and forth right here and just try to kind of catch some of the colors that are on either side. You don't want them to blend together too much, but I'm gonna catch some of that here and let that kind of fade down, and then I'm going to kind of blur this even more and just let it kind of fade together like that. And we'll do more with that later. All right. So now we're going to work on these mountains up here. Now those have a lot of foliage, and it's in different shades of green and kind of a yellowish brown color. So go ahead and you can get, like I have some of the yellowish brown on my brush. I'm going to put some green on my brush at the same time. So I've got green on one side, yellow on the other. That's totally fine. And you can kind of just twist the brush as you go. and just do little dabs. We're going to start from this corner here because most of the brightest spot is right here. So we're going to start from this corner. And we're going to kind of just keep tapping around here. Just like that. Then we're going to grab a very small amount of water because a little bit will go a long way. And we're actually going to start over here because you still have paint on your brush. So since this is a lot more faded out and less defined, we're going to start over here with adding some color into the dark. And then as you start to run out of the paint on your brush, you can come and grab some of this and spread that around. You're going to get some brown, some green, some yellow, and that is totally fine. Alright, now this part right here is a lot more predominantly green and that kind of dark greenish blue. So we're going to grab some like nice forest green and I'm going to put some blue on it as well. And I'm actually just going to start dabbing away on here. Now I want that to dry because this is a very small part here and I want to be able to pull it down, but I don't want it to be a ton of paint. So I'm actually going to use the rest of what I have on my brush over here because this has very similar coloring to it. So we're going to kind of start on this edge here, trace that edge, and go back and forth. Just like we did this way over here, we're going to go kind of diagonally over here. Grab some water on my brush. When we start to run out of that paint color over here, we definitely need some more tan in this mountain here. So we're going to kind of grab some of those white spots and put a nice decent sized chunk of that kind of tannish brown yellow color on there. Then I'm going to take what I have left on my brush here and I'm going to actually put some thicker of that tannish brown yellow color on this mountain right along here. Alright, so I'm going to rinse off my brush. Go back to here, grab some of this color and start dabbing it down. Alright, and then I'm actually going to grab the tiniest amount of black because you don't want it to overpower it. A little bit of black will go a very long way. And then I'm going to kind of outline how the trees sit on that rock, just like that. And I'm going to take that same black and I'm going to go under this yellow line that we had done because there's a nice, and I want my flat brush to be angled kind of like this. So that line that we're getting is kind of straight because these are actually trees and this right here that is catching the shadow is under the trees, kind of the trunks of the trees. So I'm going to kind of bring that up like that. And I'm going to add some more dark along this edge here. So you can get a little bit more black with that, but you still don't want a ton. Like I said before, you can always put more paint on there, but you can't really take it off super easy. It is easier with watercolors, but you don't want to get in the habit of putting a whole bunch of paint on there unless you want a whole bunch of paint on there. And that's a whole different kind of art style that we can go over at a later date. over here, especially in this back corner, because it's real dark there. So you're going to have kind of a dark line here and then spots kind of coming off of that line. Now I'm going to grab some more green and I'm going to kind of dab it off in the black a little bit just because I need to get some of the paint off, and I'd rather it get mixed in with the black than everywhere else. So I'm going to do that, and then when it's a little bit on the drier side, start dabbing in here to get some more green. And I'm doing this in kind of little lines like this, little strips. Little lines made out of dots. Okay, now I am going to grab some more black for this other side here. And I want to make sure that it doesn't completely take over where all that yellow ochre is, which is what that yellowish brown color is called. It's called yellow ochre. I'm kind of going in and around where all of that is. Alright, so then now I need more of that yellow ochre and that green for down here. And you want to follow the same pattern as up here, but it doesn't have to be exact because, like I said, the water is going to distort it quite a bit. So whoop, that was a lot of water. Did not mean to put that much water on there. Now when you make a mistake in your art, rather than starting over, I want you guys to try and either fix it or work it into your painting. It's good practice to know how to do that, especially when you have scarce supplies, or if somebody has, say, ordered a painting from you and you've started it and you're most of the way through and then you make a mistake on it. You can't just start completely over every time that happens. So we're gonna kind of go back and forth like this, like a little zigzag down here. Just put a nice dark line. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to kind of do the same thing, but very, 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 very lightly, and almost more just straight lines than an actual zigzag right here. And then dabbing off some of the black over and where it's going to be real dark. I'm going to kind of work, once it's a little bit drier, some of that dark out here without having to have it be overpowering. I'm just darkening all of this down here because that reflection in here is really dark. Just make sure you don't lose all of your green. And I'm going to get a lot of water here. And I'm going to kind of do another sweeping back and forth motion along the edges here. Just like I did with those background mountains here. But you got to make sure you follow that horizontal line. Always follow the horizontal line. You're going to have spots like this that have a lot more color, and that is totally fine. You want it to be a lot of variety here in those marks. I'll grab a little bit of water again and do it again. Now on this other side, we're going to do some kind of lighter green here, mixed with that yellowish color. Because not a lot of the color on this side actually transfers down into that reflection. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to add some more of the dark here. Starting in that corner again, even though that's already pretty dark, but we want to make sure we don't have a ton of paint on our brush, remember. And we can kind of bring it over here. If you need more, you can go grab some from that edge again. Alright, and same deal over here. A little bit of water, back and forth, follow that horizontal line. Alright, so now this is the base of your painting. It's basically done without details. So it's almost like if you were looking at this picture and squinted your eyes a little bit and didn't see any of the detail in it. That's what we've got right here. So now this is, you've done most of the actual groundwork, and now you get to do the fun part, which is adding in little details like some of the marks on the waves. So like I'm going to grab some white here. And I'm going to get my white real thick because I want to make sure the white shows up over it. And I'm going to do some horizontal lines in white. Now with the white, once you do a couple of lines, you're going to have to basically wipe it off and start and grab more because it will discolor very quickly. So you're going to put some of these reflections in the water here. Where it's catching the light. And you can do that around the edges of the mountains too, because if you'll notice there's some spots where it kind of comes in a lot. And if you do have liquid watercolors at home, this part right here is definitely easier to do with liquid watercolor because it requires a lot less trying to get the color up when you're doing a thick line of paint. But most of you probably have the watercolor palettes like what I am using, or the smaller like the individual palettes that come with kits and things like that. If you're at a site, you probably have one of these big guys that you guys are sharing. And then you can add in little trees. So if I want to make sure that there's little trees here, you can add in some of those details. Now, because this is scenery from so far away, it's more texture than actual details, and that is fine. And these back mountains here, you can actually lighten them a lot if you want, so you can get more of that distance. And the way that you will do that is take some white and mix it with a lot of water. And then you're going to do what's called a wash, which means you're going to kind of just barely brush that white over the top of what you've already painted. You don't want to push down, because if you push down, you will pick up the color from what you've already painted, and you will actually take that with you. So just barely drag your brush across, and it'll lighten. It'll lighten it without losing all of the detail involved. And now this is something that is actually easier to do if you have a palette than if you have the liquid watercolor, because the liquid watercolor comes with so much color that it can be a little bit difficult to do a wash correctly. See, this is actually why you will see artists that have a whole bunch of different kinds of brushes and a whole bunch of different kinds of paints and pencils and stuff like that. It's not because you can't get the same effect, like I used this exact same brush for this entire painting. But you may be able to get a lot of other details much easier, like these little dots, much easier if you use tiny, tiny little brushes or great big brushes for the wash or things like that. So some things are just easier to do with one instrument and some things are easier to do with another. So if you have one specific kind of tool at home for doing this, that doesn't necessarily make it better or worse than somebody else's tools. It's just everybody's got something a little bit different, and slowly but surely artists tend to collect a little bit of everything.